One of my good friends asked if I would do a video on trust, and it's such a big topic. It's vast and wide, and there are all kinds of trust, so I'm going to do my best to tackle it in some bite-sized pieces. The first thing we should probably do is define trust. What is trust? And there's a lot of different definitions out there that you can find. I think one of my favorite definitions is being in a state of unguarded interaction. Now, there's some great books and resources on trust, Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust, Flores and Solomon's book on trust, which is about this thick, it's amazing. And you'll probably hear some familiar concepts as I'm going through, because I've done a lot of research on trust, and I watch for trust. I watch for it in myself, but I also watch for it in trainings and in groups that I facilitate, because it's a very interesting human dynamic. So if trust is being prepared for a state of unguarded interaction, let's just use that definition, then what types of interactions could require trust? Lots of different ones. I want to make sure we're clear. I'm not saying that trusting is better than not trusting. It's contextual. There are times when trust is really resourceful, and there are times when trust isn't. It's maybe not even wisdom to trust. So as you're listening, notice if you're listening through a lens that says, well, trusting is a good thing, you should be trusting, or not trusting is a bad thing, versus it's a context, it's a situation by situation or a relationship by relationship, moment by moment proposition. There may be people you trust with your car keys that you wouldn't trust to watch your kids. There could be people you trust with your business that you wouldn't trust with information about your personal life. So when you think about trust, make sure that you're unpacking and pulling apart all the different nuances and what does it mean to you, and also find out what does it mean to the other person. Because oftentimes we don't define terms very well when we're talking about them. And people throw around a term like trust, and we're not always specific about, well, what kind of trust and what do we mean? And trust for what? There are 3 different types of trust that we're going to explore today. The first is simple trust. And simple trust is really the trust a child has for their parents. As children, as human beings, we are born into family. We are born trusting our parents for everything, for life, for food, for shelter, and that's a necessity, and we naturally do that. And we have that type of simple trust, of course, until we're disappointed. And we're all disappointed at some level for something, whether or not other people are aware of it. That's just also part of being human. So simple trust is no longer available to us as we're adults, or even as we're young adults. It's really reserved for that part of your life that you may or may not even remember when you were a tiny little baby or a toddler. So simple trust off the table. The second type of trust is blind trust. And blind trust could sound like either I trust everybody until they give me a reason not to, or I don't trust anyone until they give me a reason to trust them. And those are really the same conversation, just 2 sides of the same conversation. Why do we call that blind trust? Well, it's blind because it's blind to the present moment. It's blind to the person in front of you and to the context. Because I've pre-decided trusting everybody is the right thing to do and I'm moralizing it, or I'm telling myself trusting no one is the right thing to do and I'm moralizing it the other way. Either way, it creates a huge blind spot to who I'm with in this moment and what is happening right now. Here's one way to notice if you're operating in blind trust. Let's say you have a business associate or a friend and their behavior changes. And instead of investigating or inquiring or seeing if their interests have changed, something is different, you tell yourself they're just not acting like themselves. You explain it away or you rationalize it to yourself without having a conversation with them. So here's the blindness. You've already decided how they are. What you're blind to is what's happening right now in this moment, which is also a part of how people are, because people do change based on their interests, based on the way they're looking at their world or themselves. So someone's not acting like themselves is often an indicator that there's blind trust at play. Typically where that leads is a surprise down the road. Now, it's not an actual surprise, but it seems like a surprise because I haven't had the conversation, I haven't investigated, I've explained away any possible alerts or flags that have popped up in the relationship. And so to me, it seems like all of a sudden, something's changed. All of a sudden, they're a different person, when perhaps they've been giving messages all along that I haven't explored, I haven't been curious about. I've just explained away because I'm committed to a level of blind trust, because it seems easier to have pre-decided instead of staying present in the moment with who I'm with. On the flip side, if I don't trust anybody until they give me a reason to trust them, you could say, well, that's logical. I've been betrayed. I've been disappointed. Of course I'm going to do that. That's how I protect myself. Got it? Very logical. I hear you. Makes sense. And it also creates a very specific blindness, because people on the receiving end, what they're receiving is really your suspicion or your bitterness that may or may not have anything to do with them. It may have more to do with your history or your past decisions. And so oftentimes when someone's on the receiving end of, I don't trust you until you give me a reason to, their capacity to want to continue to engage, to press in, to stick around starts to diminish. Maybe they do leave, or maybe they do make a different decision. And of course, the minute they do, you can say, look at it, see, I told you, I knew it, I knew they would leave. Because we can't see the way we've created an invitation for people to leave, because the environment is hostile. It's not an invitation to actually connect, be present, and find out who's over there. Suspicion is very powerful, and I have an entire video on it, so definitely check that out. It'll illuminate a lot more nuance around this topic. The third type of trust is authentic trust. That is the type of trust where you know you're at risk, you know you're vulnerable to hurt or disappointment, and yet you choose to bestow your trust anyway. Because in any relationship, of course, there's a possibility of disappointment. Of course, there's a possibility of hurt or frustration, betrayal. That's just human nature. But the more present you are with the people that you're with, the more questions you're probably going to ask, the more investigation you will naturally do to actually flush out the fullness of the context of trust. And what are we trusting each other for? Is it for the car keys? Is it for the business deal? Is it to communicate on a regular basis? What are my expectations? Because expectations play into trust. Have I communicated my expectations clearly? Have I asked the other person what their expectations are? And in the middle of all that, I can still choose to bestow trust. Now, I'm saying bestow trust because that's another way to think about trust. Oftentimes, people think about trust as something someone else earns. You have to earn it, or you didn't earn it. And so the power in that relationship is all with the other person. They're either earning it or they're not earning it. I'm suggesting that to fully live in your agency, consider trust as something you can choose to bestow on another person or not. Because again, we're not moralizing it. We're not saying you have to do it because it's good. We're saying you could choose to do it. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's wisdom not to bestow trust. But if you're present with the person and you're asking questions and there's a connection, you'll be able to discern, is this an opportunity for me to bestow trust? Do I choose to bestow my trust or not? And it's up to you whether you bestow trust or not. If this was resourceful for you, then like, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications, and pop something in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. What would you like to hear about? What topic are you interested in? What's a hot topic in your life right now? And make sure you check out that video on suspicion. It's a good one.